the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody to the Yaron Brook Show on this Thursday night. I wasn't expecting to do a show today. I really wasn't. But I was working and doing some stuff on a call, and I happened to open up Google News, and I saw the exit poll results from the British election, and I thought, I have to do a show tonight. Because, it's rare that we get good news. Once in a while, we actually do get good news. And it's not pure good news, but because I don't love the winners. But I hate the losers. So in this case, and I don't hate the winners. So in this case, there's a lot to celebrate tonight. And primarily, it is really exciting to see that the British people, the people of the British Isles, from with acceptance of the Scots, we'll get to the Scots in a minute, but that the people of the British Isles have basically rejected socialism. I mean, this is unequivocally there were two issues on the ballot here. There was Brexit, but it was very difficult to know how to vote on Brexit because theoretically, at least, both political parties, both the Conservatives and the Labour Party, were pro-Brexit, although the Conservatives were dedicated to Brexit and the Labour were hedging themselves. Boris said that he would decide kind of finally after the election. But so Brexit was on the agenda. Clearly Brexit won huge because the one party that was clearly against Brexit, the Liberal Democrats, the Liberal Party, gained maybe one seat, it looks like, from exit polls. Did not do very well. I thought they would do much better. I thought the entire Remain vote would go to the Liberal Democrats, but it didn't. So the Liberal Democrats stayed a small, at this point, insignificant political party in England. And so the numbers are that the Conservatives have picked up, it looks like at least, it's hard. The Guardian numbers just suck. It's the Guardian. I don't know why I'm looking at Guardian numbers. Because I figure if I look at the most leftist, I'll get the best clue. But right, it looks like the Tories have a majority of 86, right? They picked up over 50 votes that will get them to 368. So it's not a majority of 86. I don't know how they get that. Maybe with other parties, but the Conservatives are picking up 50 or more seats. They'll have 368 members of Parliament. They need 326 to have a majority. So that for the first time in a few years, they will have an out-and-out majority. I read somewhere this will be the best outcome for the Conservatives since 1987. That was Margaret Thatcher. So we'll see if that really pans out. Again, this is all exit polls, so we still don't know. But the interesting one is that the Labour lost 71 seats. So this election, again, was on two issues. Brexit was won, and it won overwhelmingly. The anti-Brexit forces were basically crushed. And second, it was about socialism. Now, Corbyn is a socialist, not a Bernie Sanders, let's be like Denmark socialist, a real socialist, let's nationalize industries socialist, a socialist, let's, the state should own the means of production. So Corbyn wasn't a social democrat in the kind of the soft sense of the American socialists. He was an out-and-out, redistribute everything, raise taxes significantly, and nationalize industry, take over the means of production. And the fact that lost big, means that Corbyn is probably out as the leader of the Labour movement. The Labour Party in the UK will have to move back to a more centrist party, the party of Tony Blair, which is a major victory. I'm really interested to see how the vote splits up among young people, because given the overwhelming numbers here, it suggests that even young people didn't go as overwhelmingly as in the last election, and as the polls have often suggested, to the left, that maybe socialism isn't even attractive anymore to the young people. It really is fabulous news that a real scumbag like Jeremy Corbyn, a socialist, an anti-Semite, just a hater, a nihilist, the worst of the worst, much worse than anything we have in the United States, lost big, lost significant, lost by a landslide. And if these numbers turn out to be right, then there's a lot to celebrate. Celebrate their loss more than anything else. So that's great news. The second part of the great news is that a Conservative Party, which I think is a very mixed bag, obviously. I mean, but during this election, they promised to spend money like crazy. They promised to expand the NHS. They promised to expand welfare programs. But a Conservative Party that has also shed many of its moderates and has become, at least many of the kind of more free market voices within the party are in leadership positions today. Maybe it's the most free market Conservative Party since the Margaret Thatcher days. It's a Conservative Party that's certainly significantly better than it has been for the last probably 20, 30 years. Has won big. It now has to deliver on Brexit. So there will be Brexit. There will be Brexit. My expectation is pretty quickly. The voters have made their views very clear. I think a lot of it is just, let's get it over with. This is dragging on forever. Let's just get it over with. So I think they're going to have to get it over with. And then the question is, what kind of deal, what is the best deal they can get? And then what do they do with Brexit? I've always said Brexit can be really good for the UK, and it can be a disaster for the UK. And I think there's some hope that they do the right thing. There's some hope that they actually move the UK in a free market direction, move the UK in a direction that is pro-free markets, and particularly pro-trade, which is tough in a world of tariffs. But even Donald Trump today, said they're probably not going to raise tariffs on the Chinese, and they have some kind of a deal. But in the UK, they really have an opportunity to change the dialogue around trade and to really sign trade deals or bilateral trade deals with all kinds of countries around the world. Ideally, my ideal, it won't happen, but my ideal would be that they reduce tariffs to zero across the board and just make the United Kingdom a free trade island, that they reduce regulations primarily on the financial industry, which is really worried about Brexit and about their ability to stay in England. But if they reduce regulations, if they make capital easy to flow in and out, if they make it. So here's the point. I've said this many, many times. There's certain things about the European Union that are really, really, really good. Free movement of capital, free movement of goods, and free movement of labor, in my view, are excellent features of the European Union. And if they had stuck to that, even a common currency I don't think is a bad idea for the European Union. But if they'd stuck to that, then I think the European Union would be great. The problem is that they've established that now they have to have uniform regulations, uniform laws, uniform rules. And that's the disaster that is the European Union. And the question is, and this is the real question the Conservative Party will have to deal with, is are they willing to really, truly get rid of all the EU regulations that are so cumbersome, so anti-business, so anti-freedom, and really bring about a relatively freer market in the UK? So that is going to be a challenge. And can they somehow overcome the damage of losing the free flow of goods, capital and labor. Can they mimic that by establishing free trade with other countries and by establishing, if not a zero tariff environment, a very, very low tariff environment for the UK? And that's going to be interesting to watch and interesting to see what Boris Johnson does, who he appoints the next government, what kind of ministers he has, and what they actually do. Now it's really the question of what actually gets done. We're going to get Brexit. Thankfully, that is going to be over with very, very soon. And then we can move on to see what is actually going on. What are they actually going to do with this? So, I mean, the British people, I find it really interesting because they are, I think, more intellectual than Americans. And there is a spirit of freedom. There is a spirit of liberty. There's a spirit of not quite in the American sense, not quite the sense of individualism that America has, but a strong spirit of individualism, maybe more now than ever before. And I think that is reflected in this election, in the rejection of socialism. And now the question is, will it be manifest in the way Boris Johnson rules? Also, you know, I know that I've got a bunch of friends in the UK that are thrilled by what has just happened. So, one more downside to Brexit that I think I should mention, it's important to mention, given this election, given the election result, because one of the things that happened during this election, again, according to the exit polls, we'll see if it actually manifests itself, is that the Scottish National Party has gained significant amount of seats, 20 seats. They basically now have 55 of the 59 seats in Scotland. Now, this is a political party dedicated to independence for Scotland. So while the UK is now going to exit the European Union, Scotland is going to want to exit the United Kingdom and, in a sense, rejoin the European Union. So one of the casualties of the Brexit and of this election could very well be the dismantling of the United Kingdom. And if that happens, it would be really, really, really tragic. I mean, tragic certainly for the Scots, because I think, you know, the dominant political parties, dominant, you know, politicians in Scotland are socialists. So they would suffer the most. But it would be bad for all of the UK. I mean, I am not a believer in small countries. I'm not a believer in, what do you call it? Countries leaving and the establishment of new countries, smaller and smaller countries based on ethnic or ancient geographic borders. I think all of that is nonsense and bad. And I think it's destructive. I've said many times I believe there should be fewer countries, not more countries. So I think that's one of the victims of Brexit. But the thing about Brexit is that it now puts the responsibility, it now puts the burden on the Brits to figure out what they are going to do. What they are going to do. Jennifer asks, what effect do you think a more free Britain has on the UK, on the United States? I think it does have an impact. I think we still look to the UK, we still look up to the UK in some respect. I think the British politicians and British intellectuals are still very much respected in the United States. I think if the atmosphere in Britain, if Britain becomes more free, then I think that will have a positive impact on intellectuals in the US. The flip side of that, the negative aspect of that, is the rise of nationalism. Again, Brexit is a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it gives people more power over their economic fate. The Brits have more power over the economic fate. On the other hand, it can be interpreted as, and has been, with some legitimacy interpreted as, a move towards more nationalism, a move towards stopping immigration, a move towards, Brits will decide Britain's fates, and Scots will decide Scotland's fates. And so it has been interpreted as a much more nationalist, and to the extent that that is the case, then that is a negative. So again, I am very mixed on Brexit. I think it's probably the best thing given the European Union and given the direction the European Union is heading. But I fear that much of what is happening is motivated by nationalism. Now, the conservative movement in the UK is not a crazy nationalist movement. It's not radical. It's not extreme in any sense in those directions. In some sense, it's more moderate nationalism-wise than I think the populists, than some of their voters are. The socialists are really radical socialists. So the fact that they were defeated is definitely a good thing. So it's, again, the complete thrashing of Jeremy Corbyn is the best political news I've heard in a very, very, very long time. Again, much worse. He is much worse than anything the Democrats in the United States would put up and could possibly put up. So it's, yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson doesn't strike me particularly as a nationalist, but Boris Johnson, of course, is not anything. I think Boris Johnson is a very clever, very smart man who is not particularly ideological in any kind of sense. He's not a free marketer. He's not a capitalist. He's not a nationalist. He's not anything. By the way, Nigel Farage's Brexit party is predicted to get 0 seats. And I think what gave this election to Boris Johnson, to a large extent, is that Nigel Farage, about a month ago, maybe less than a month ago, basically said that the Brexit party would not put up candidates against the Conservatives in districts the Conservatives were expected to win, so that they didn't split the Brexit vote and allow Labour to gain a footing. So I think that played a huge role in the Conservatives just winning outright. The fact that Nigel Farage basically stood down, which was, which was good. Which is good for him, and I think it was the right thing to do if you believe in Brexit and if you want to reject and deny Corbyn a majority. Again, the votes in England are a little bit like the House of Representatives. You vote for a candidate in your little district, so it's not a popular vote nationwide for the party. It is the number of people voted in particular districts. So the fact that Nigel Farage stepped away from running in districts that the Conservatives were going to win anyway helped the Conservatives win those districts. So it didn't give the Labour an opportunity to beat them in a three-way race. I don't know what the results are for Northern Ireland. I haven't seen the Northern Ireland results. I know there were some questions about that. Again, these are not official results. These are still just exit polls. And we know how flawed exit polls are, although they've been fairly accurate in the UK in the recent past. So far, I think there are only like 5 districts that have declared. 5 seats have been declared out of 650. And in those 5, the Conservatives have gained 1 and Labour has lost 1. So 4 Labour, 1 is Conservative, but Labour has already lost 1 of its seats. So I don't know what's happening in Northern Ireland. I don't think, again, it matters that much. Northern Ireland would have to just do what the Conservatives want them to do, given that they have an out-and-out majority that now can dictate policy with regard to Brexit. Brexit has some complexity around Northern Ireland because if there are now trade restrictions between the European Union and the UK, that means there are trade restrictions between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And that border has basically been an open border since both were part of the European Union. And I think both Northern Ireland and Ireland would like to keep it that way, and I think what's going to happen is that is difficult because once the goods enter through Northern Ireland into Ireland, they can just enter directly into the UK, and then there is no border. Now, that would be my ideal solution, that there be no border in that sense for goods to travel, that is that the UK keep a policy of zero tariffs across all its borders in both directions, and let the European Union be the one that places the tariffs, not the UK. But it's almost impossible to believe that will be an outcome, and it's not been in any of the proposals. That has not been proposed. All right, let me quickly look at the different questions. Do you think there's a world where the UK is more economically free than the US? Yes, I do. I think it's hard for them because of socialized medicine. But Canada, for a while, was freer than the United States economically. During the worst of the Obama years, from an economic freedom perspective, Canada was rated higher in the Economic Freedom Index than the United States. The UK is not that far behind the United States in Economic Freedom Index. I think the US is going to be declining in the Economic Freedom Index under Trump. I think government deficits, tariffs are just two of the government spending are just two of the things that are going to cause the United States to decline in the Economic Freedom Index. And by the way, I'll be interviewing on Saturday. We're going to do a show called Socialism Sucks, where I am going to be interviewing the author of the book, Socialism Sucks, Robert Lawson, who is an economics professor at SMU University in Dallas, who is also the author of the Economic Freedom Index. So you can ask Robert about things like the difference between the UK and the US from an economic freedom index perspective, and what would it take for the UK to overtake the United States, and why are some countries where they are, and why is China so low in the economic freedom index but has grown so fast. So I think it'll be a fascinating interview, and you can ask a lot of these kind of questions. And the economic freedom index indeed is quite fascinating. Let's see. On a scale of 1 to 10, how religious are the British people? Well, I don't know what you mean by 1 to 10. Is 10 the most religious, 1 the least religious? They're very non-religious. The British people are very non-religious. Another huge advantage I think they have over the American people is that they're much more likely to be attracted to reason because of their lack of religiosity. I also think that another advantage the English have, and I've said this on previous shows, is, I speak at high schools in England all the time. I do about 10 talks a year at English high schools. And their educational system is like so much better than the American educational system. They actually know history. They actually know stuff. It's still not great, but it's far superior to the American educational system. So I think that's another reason for hope in the UK versus the United States. But no, they're not religious at all. All right. Okay, I don't see any other questions on the elections. But again, the Conservatives look like they have won a major victory, the largest victory for the Conservative Party in the UK since Margaret Thatcher. Let's hope that they govern like a Thatcher government. And it is also the biggest loss. So this is more important. The Labour Party will have 199, it looks like, seats in Parliament. That will be their worst showing since 1935. They were showing since 1935. Now, that is pretty fantastic. And that is a complete and utter repudiation, rejection of Jeremy Corbyn and the socialist agenda of the Labour Party of the last few years. This is not about Brexit. It's not about anything else. It's about rejection of socialism in England. And I cannot be happier that Jeremy Corbyn lost, right? Now we'll see what Boris Johnson does with this victory. But Jeremy Corbyn lost. That is super cool and super good if you value freedom and if you reject socialism and you hate socialism. So all good news on that front. All right, we've got a few more A few more questions. Are public employees glorified warfare recipients? Well, not exactly. I mean, they do work, but their work is destructive, and in many respects, they're worse than welfare recipients because government employees in jobs, and I don't want to generalize here, if you worked for the Defense Department or in the FBI or in the Justice Department or in departments that actually are part of the legitimate function of government, then I think, that's great. There's nothing parasitical about what you're doing. But the rest of it is not, like if you work at a regulatory agency, you are worse than a welfare recipient because you're actually actively destructive. You're actually actively harmful to the most productive people in our society. So you're doing harm. You're not just living at somebody else's expense. You're living at somebody else's expense and putting that somebody else in shackles, which is far, far more worse. So again, I would separate public employees into two groups. Those who work in legitimate functions of government, police, FBI, military, Justice Department, judges, lawyers, people who have to deal with judges and lawyers, the whole justice apparatus. And the ones, and particularly evil, are the ones that work in those places that involve regulating, controlling, and violating people's rights on a day-to-day basis. Just don't take a government job. Just go do something else. Somebody asks, is Brexit guaranteed now or just more likely? I think it's pretty guaranteed. I think it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine how Boris Johnson could screw it, how the Conservatives could screw this up. They've gotten a mandate. They've got a majority. It's really up to them. Boris Johnson ran on Brexit. He positioned the election around Brexit. No, I think it's 99.9% for sure that we get Brexit. And my guess is we get Brexit pretty quickly because Boris Johnson is going to want to capitalize it and want to get on with the business of what needs to be done. I think if time passes, people are going to get very antsy. And I think the faster he does it, the more he can prove it's not a disaster, the more he can show the Scots that they maybe actually benefit from it economically, the less likely it is that Scotland splits off, and the healthier the whole thing becomes. So I hope he does it. If he does it quickly. I think, again, the best thing, in my view, but I don't think will happen, the best thing would be a hard Brexit where they exit and just leave the EU without a deal and then basically open up their borders to EU products and reduce regulations from EU levels and let the EU be the bad guys who raise tariffs and raise regulations and do all that. That would be the ideal. That's not going to happen, but that's what should happen. That's what ideally would happen. All right. Somebody asked me, did you see the Adam Curtis documentary, All Watched Over by Loving Grace? It features Ayn Rand and her philosophical impact of America. I have not. I'll look for it. I'll save that comment so that I can look for it and see. I assume it's worth watching or at least interesting if it's got Ayn Rand in it. Okay, so there's a bunch of unrelated questions here. Let me see if any of them are related. Let's just do some political ones. Did you see Joe Biden's recent disturbing hairy legs speech, gaffe? How seriously should we take these things? He came across as legit crazy. I don't think he's crazy. I just think he's a fool in many respects, and he doesn't know how to shut his mouth, and he does it in ways that are particularly stupid. And I find it hard to believe that he's going to win the Democratic nomination. He never has before, and I just don't think he is this time. Now, I'm not sure who is going to win. It seems difficult to imagine, but he strikes me as a goof, as another kind of, as somebody not very smart and who's goofy, not serious, and not a thinker. It's just chaotic and a jumble, but also not. Oh, don't do that. Not as dangerous as some of these other ideologues like Elizabeth Warren. somebody's asking about my thoughts on Trump's executive order concerning anti-Semitism. I suspect I don't like it, but I was going to look at it today, but then I thought I'm not going to have a show, so I don't need to look at it, and I was going to look at it over the weekend. So let me talk about that one on Sunday and give you my thoughts on it then. I probably won't like it because I think it's anti-free speech, but just to make sure, let me look at it on. The problem is, if it relates to campuses, is because of Title IX, the government regulates a ton of stuff on campuses. And that, I think, is wrong, and I think the only way to solve that problem is basically to get the government out of funding universities and therefore get rid of Title IX and get rid of all the different regulations that the government has on universities. And to do that, you have to get rid of government financing of universities through student loans. So you have to privatize the entire student loan industry and get the government completely and thoroughly out of that business. And only then will we have, proper free speech. Can we have proper free speech on campuses? The government is already enmeshed in all of that. Okay. All right. Let me see. Let me go from the top to the bottom. I have some unrelated questions. Feel free to wait until the end. Okay. I'm curious what you thought of this quote from Du Dajing. When justice is gone, ritual will follow. Ritual is the product of scant integrity, the beginning of chaos. Yeah, I like that quote. I think that quote is great. You could also replace ritual with tradition. So when justice is gone, which I take as an understanding of justice and an application of justice, but justice is a first-handed thing. It's something we understand what it is and apply it. Then I think people revert, but people still need guidance, right? They still need to know how to treat other people. And if they don't have justice to guide them, then they rely on tradition, which is typically religious tradition. And that is the beginning of chaos. That is the beginning of the end. I don't know if I'd say the beginning of chaos or the beginning of authoritarianism. I think it's the beginning of authoritarianism, which you could argue is chaos. But yeah, I think it's a good quote. And, you have to interpret it the way an objectivist would interpret it to see it as a good quote. But yes, tradition, religion replace people's thinking when reason is out. So when a reasoned explanation and justification for justice disappears, then irrational reasons enter, and that leads to chaos and authoritarianism. What is your personal thought on the genocide of Muslims in China, and what, if any, would be an ideal objectivist response in the U.S.? Now, I don't think there is a genocide of Muslims in China. I might be wrong, but my understanding is that the Muslims in China, there are 3 million of them in indoctrination camps. They're not being slaughtered. They're not being killed in mass, I think. Although, this is almost as bad, but not quite. Putting people in jail is not the same as killing them. And these indoctrination camps, they spend a variety of lengths of time in it. Some of them involve torture. Some of them are pretty horrific. And, I think it's bad. And I think it's an inappropriate response to a real problem, which the Chinese identify. And which and I haven't really talked about this. I should really talk. I should do a show about this because it's a complex issue. What the Chinese are facing in China was a real rise in Islamic terrorism. And they look around the world, and they see the same thing all around the world. They see it in the Middle East. They see it in the United States, 9/11. They see it in Europe with ISIS and other terrorist attacks. And there was a period in China where there's a significant rise in terrorist attacks all over China. Swordsmen would come out and kill lots of people, and it was really bad. And what they see is the West's weakness in dealing with the problem. Ongoing, continued weakness in dealing with the problem. And they decided, because they're an authoritarian regime and they can do this, and because because they're a decisive regime. I think they have more, in a sense, self-esteem than we do. They decide to deal with it. And the way to deal with it is to round these people up and to put them into camps and to put them in prisons, and no trial, no jury, nothing. If you're Muslim, particularly if you're Muslim from particular regions that they think can spawn terrorism, we're going to attempt to re-indoctrinate you. We're going to attempt to get the Islam out of you. And in a sense, they look back on Mao's period, and in Mao's period there was no Islamic terrorism, and partially because I think there was this indoctrination into Marxism and into atheism, and the Muslims kept their heads low and didn't antagonize Mao. And remember, China has a large Muslim population in its west, and it borders with large Muslim populations, and it's not far from Afghanistan. It has a border with Pakistan, which are hubs for Islamists, for jihadis, and Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and all the stands over there all have some elements within their societies that are very Islamist and really Islamic totalitarian, and China's worried about that, and legitimately worried about it, right? Because it's a legitimate threat. So then the question is, what do you do about that threat? Now, I think the way they've chosen to do it is a wrong way. It's penalizing everybody, and there's no reason to do that. There are mechanisms by which you can engage in screening, in figuring out who the enemy is, in going after the enemy ruthlessly. But you don't give up the rule of law because you're fighting terrorists in your own country. I think China should join the United States, if the United States had the balls to do it, in eliminating the ideological sources of the Islamic threat, which is Saudi Arabia and Iran, and to help completely eviscerate the threat that way. Because I don't think there'd be an uprising in China if they were, or even imagining an uprising in China, if not for Iran and for Saudi Arabia and money and other support that they get. By the way, you're seeing the same treatment, similar treatment, just more of a massacre, more of a straight genocide in Myanmar, in what used to be Burma, where the Muslims are being killed in very large numbers. And again, for somewhat similar reasons, because they constitute a threat, but also because of nationalism and hatred of the other and racism and things like that. So it's a mixture, and it's hard to tell in these cultures what is really the driving force. Now, what should the United States do about this? I think very little. I think the United States is not the policeman of the world. The United States should not, what the United States should do should condemn it. I've always said, I don't believe the United States should have an embassy in China. I don't think we should treat China as our equal. I don't think we should be negotiating with China and treating them with kid gloves. I think we should trade with China. I think we should have zero tariffs with China. And otherwise, I think we should condemn them, morally sanction them, support their enemies like Taiwan and like Hong Kong, primarily morally, intellectually, and with arms, and treat China like an outsider of the international community, like the rights-violating authoritarian regime that they are. I mean, I have a very unique foreign policy. I don't think many people share my views on foreign policy. I believe that the United States should not have embassies, not even embassies, in countries that are authoritarian, in countries that are dictatorships. So no embassy in Saudi Arabia or, Syria or Yemen or, questionable about Egypt, certainly none in some of the other Arab countries. No embassy in Vietnam, no embassy in China. And then have zero tariffs with these countries, trade. And let individual people decide whether they think it's moral to trade with those countries or not, but actually have no diplomatic relationships, not recognize them, not sanction them. Daniel says embassies are tacit admissions of approval. Absolutely. 100% agree with you. And therefore, we should withdraw embassies for like 100 countries around the world. We should have embassies only in relatively free countries. And there are going to be some borderline cases where we might not agree, but that's fine. But most cases we'll agree on. who is free and who is not. All right. An embassy is again, it's a sanction. It's saying you're legit. You have sovereignty, and I don't believe authoritarian governments have sovereignty. All right, no more super chat questions because I don't want to make this a long show. This is not a show I plan to do anyway. So that's my view of what the U.S. should do about what's going on with China. What are your thoughts on subliminal advertising? Not much. I don't believe in it. If you're susceptible to subliminal advertising, then you deserve subliminal advertising. If you're not susceptible to it, then you're not susceptible to it. And the way not to be susceptible to it is to not be an impulse buyer, to not buy stuff, not do anything on impulse, not to be guided by your emotion. Subliminal advertising is advertising that is geared to the emotion. It's geared towards non-thinkers. It's geared towards people who don't think about what they're doing. I am an advocate of thinking. I'm an advocate of reason. I'm an advocate of being rational. That requires effort. People who engage in the effort to think, to choose, to rationally consider their alternatives are not susceptible to subliminal messages. The people who are susceptible are the people who don't think. And therefore they deserve it. So I have no problem with subliminal advertising. All right. If ethics doesn't factor into the conduct of war, does the charge that Nazi principles were guilty of crimes against humanity make any sense? Was it merely justice by the victors? No. And I've never, ever, 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 ever said ethics doesn't factor into the conduct of war. I've never said that. Ethics factors into the conduct of war just like it factors into every aspect of life. But the right ethics. What doesn't factor into the conduct of war and shouldn't factor into the conduct of your own life and shouldn't factor into the conduct of anything that you do is altruism. When you go to war, you should be guided by the ethics of egoism, by the ethic of selfishness, by the ethic that says that you, in defending egoistic people, in other words, in defending their individual rights, must do whatever is necessary to win and minimize the casualties to your own side because you respect the individual rights of your soldiers, the individual rights of your people. The Nazis were not fighting for rights. They were not fighting for individuals. Therefore, nothing they did, even if they behaved in the most chivalrous way possible, even if they never killed a civilian in any one of their attacks, everything they did was evil. Because it was motivated by an evil ideology, evil ideas, evil motivations, evil purposes. So it doesn't matter how they conducted their war. They were evil through and through. And the Nazis should have been, absolutely they were guilty of crimes against humanity for their very existence. Indeed, I think the trial should have been wider and more people should have been tried than were actually tried for crimes against humanity. In a sense, every member of the Nazi Party was guilty of crimes against humanity by participating in the Nazi Party. The party is a crime against humanity. So there is no justice by the victor. Ethics absolutely matters. Justice in ethics absolutely matters. People should get what they deserve. The Germans, by supporting the Nazis, got what they deserved. Massive death and destruction. The Japanese, by supporting the regime that engaged in horrific warfare all across Asia and attacked the United States, got what they deserved. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, some of the people who died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were innocent, children, for example. But they are the victims of their own government. They are the victims of the people who put them in a position where they had to die in order for America to win. I'm not shouting at you, Daniel, but there's a huge difference. Huge difference. No war, no matter how it's conducted, is ever justifiable if it's not for the purpose of defending individual rights. In other words, if it's not a war of self-defense. But don't accept the idea that ethics equals altruism. It's not. That's not ethics. Do you think that Greta Thunberg will one day be Prime Minister of Sweden, and would that be a good thing? No, I don't think she'll ever be a Prime Minister. I mean, Greta Thunberg is a flash in the pan. She is Man of the Year, or Woman of the Year, Person of the Year for Time magazine. She'll have a couple more years while she's got that crazy look on her face, and while she can act like a child and, wag her finger at the adults and have this moral aura around her about how morally superior she is, and use the altruism against people. But at some point, people get tired of it. At some people, she won't be a child anymore. And at that point, she will disappear from the stage. And maybe, as the fact is that in 12 years, the world will not end, people will at least wake up to that this cycle, the world is not going to end. They'll still have world is going to end dreams, but at least I recognize that she and this generation of crazy doom-saying maniacs are not going to win. Were wrong and failed and won't support her. So no, she's nothing. I mean, again, I did a whole show on why I think she's successful. She's successful because she talks in moral language. But at some point, that childhood innocence will go away, and they'll find somebody else to worship. Missed first part of the show. I know a schedule is not in the cards. How about if you tweet on the day you are going to do a show? We can look at the timeline of the day. So I did tweet it, but I tweeted like 10 minutes before. And the problem is I decided at the last minute to do a show because, as I said in the beginning of the show, I saw the results, the exit polls of the UK results. And I said, I have to comment on this, so I did a show. So I wasn't planning to do a show, so I couldn't have tweeted earlier. But, of course, you can listen to the show. You don't have to be here live. I like it that you're here live. I enjoy having a live audience. I mean, most of you I enjoy. And I enjoy knowing that there's somebody listening to me right now rather than speaking into a tape. I'm aging myself, like I'm talking like a boomer, right? Tape, like recording myself onto this thing and then only streaming it, only playing it later. I like the idea that people are watching. And right now we've got 140 watching live on YouTube, and we've got, I don't know, close to 40 watching it live on Facebook. Facebook keeps bouncing around, but it was up to 50 a while ago. So yeah, so we got about almost 200 people watching this live, probably a few people watching it live on Twitter. So all is good in the world because I know there's some minds live listening to me, and then 4,000 people will watch this in the next few days, not live. Okay, the 10 least corrupt countries have small populations. Isn't being small therefore a huge advantage since the payoff for being corrupt is smaller? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the way to think about politics. I think that's not a very healthy way to think about politics. America was a very there's uncorrupt country in the 19th century, even though it was relatively large and the returns in corruption were high. There's some small, very, very corrupt countries. So I don't think size is the issue. I think the reason the 10 least corrupt countries have small populations is the 10 least corrupt countries are in Europe, and there's small countries in Europe. But no, I don't think that's how to think about politics. You think about politics in terms of individual rights, and you think about politics in terms of freedom, and you think about politics in terms of the rule of law, and in those terms, there's no advantage for smallness. Indeed, there's an advantage for largeness. You want stable law across large geographic areas so the trade is easy and seamless and low cost across those areas. Division of labor, human migration, all of that becomes seamless over large geographic areas. And that's a huge economic benefit, but it's also a huge freedom index. You can move freely. You can travel freely. You can exchange goods freely. And if you have a free government, which is what we're assuming, then why not have more people under freedom than less people under freedom? All right, I think I'm done. For a show I didn't intend to do, that was quick, but good. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. I'll be back, as I said, on Saturday, 2 p.m. East Coast time. I'm pretty sure. Let me just check my calendar. I think so. So those of you who want well advanced notice, here's the advanced notice. Saturday, it will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I will be interviewing Robert Lawson. Robert Lawson is a professor of economics at SMU. He's not an objectivist, just so everybody knows, so there's no questions. He's not an objectivist, but he wrote a book called Socialism Sucks. And he also is the co-author every year of the Economics Freedom Index, which is published by the Fraser Institute out of Canada. And I bump into Robert all over the world, and the book is a fun book to read. It's a good title, and it's a fun book to read. And we're going to talk about socialism. We'll talk about the Economic Freedom Index. We'll talk about stuff like that, a little bit about economics. I think you'll enjoy it. Again, don't expect philosophy because there won't be any, and he's not an objectivist. He probably disagrees with objectivism on quite a few things. But I thought, I enjoyed the book. He asked me for an interview. I thought that would be good. And he's a real free market economist, right? So he's a real free market economist and a friend. So it should be good. It should be good. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. I will see you on Saturday. Have a great rest of the week. And enjoy, for those of you in the UK, hopefully we've got a few here from the UK. Enjoy tonight. Enjoy Corbyn's defeat. And let's hope for a free, a true free market Great Britain of the future. Bye, everybody.